Yo, what's up guys? Welcome to the Race Roundtable. Today I've got a video about the FIA directive regarding porpoising, which may come into effect during this weekend for the Canadian Grand Prix. So I'll just give you an overview and what it potentially means for the teams and who it affects the best and who it affects the worst. So starting off, it says a technical directive has been issued to give guidance to the teams about the measures the FIA intends to take to tackle the problem. These include closer scrutiny of the planks and skids, both in terms of their design and the observed wear. So, with this first point, already as part of the regulations, the floor of a car cannot exceed a certain amount of wear. And they measured this after qualifying and after the race, I think. And that's why the wooden plank is there, to stop, because wood is more, it wears more than metal. So, it's put there to prevent teams from running their cars so low, to reduce and prevent events of bottoming, which is when the bottom of the car touches the ground, which happened a lot in the 90s, 80s, 70s, which is why you saw sparks, natural sparks. So there's going to be closer scrutiny of the planks and the skids the teams use, and also their design, which is interesting because you would assume that the FIA would be fine with the design of these skids. And because obviously tight regulations this year with the cars, the new cars. So maybe they're looking at maybe one team has a specific design that creates porpoising or something. I don't know. But definitely with the planks, it's interesting because you already have close scrutiny of the planks. There's only like 2-3 millimeters amount of wear that you're allowed after qualifying in the race. So it's intriguing, that first point. So we'll move on to the second point that they've come up with. The definition of a metric based on the car's vertical acceleration that will give a quantitative limit for acceptable level of vertical oscillations. The exact mathematical formula for this metric is still being analysed by the FIA, and the Formula 1 teams have been invited to contribute to this process. And so this effectively means that teams will have to raise their ride height to a level where porpoising or bouncing or whatever doesn't happen, or to an extent where it doesn't affect their drivers in terms which could end up causing an accident, causing them injuries. And this is interesting because there's people on Twitter saying that, damn, Mercedes got their way. People have assumed that Mercedes are going to do well. This is not going to help Mercedes in terms of actual performance, and Mercedes in a vacuum. No, it's not going to help Mercedes at all, because they're the most susceptible team to porpoising. And their car only works really well when it's really low down. This is going to impact them negatively a lot because they now can't run their car so low like they want to. Yes, raising the ride height decreases performance, but at least it keeps your drivers safe. Having it so low like they had in Azerbaijan almost wrecked Lewis Hamilton's back. And there's also people on Twitter calling Lewis Hamilton a diva, a crybaby. You guys are clowns. But there's other teams will be affected by this as well. McLaren ran their car really low last weekend, and Daniel Ricciardo suffered from porpoising, the back problems. You don't see people calling out Daniel Ricciardo for complaining about back problems. Literally, Bottas, Gasly, Ricciardo, Hamilton, Russell, Sainz, they've all come out and talked about porpoising and the issues they're facing. And Lewis Hamilton is the one being called a diva. So, you know, there was a clown on my Twitter telling me this. But yeah, that aside, Mercedes will have to raise their ride height, no doubt, because once you have a certain level of porpoising, you may get disqualified. This is a technical directive based on safety grounds, which means the teams can't have a say in this. And this directive being implemented, it's mandatory now. It's implemented. It's in place. I don't know for this weekend, but it's in place now. Anything to do with safety, the FIA can just implement it straight away, and no qualms from the team. They can't complain. This is the right decision by the FIA, because sooner or later, someone was either going to have a big accident or suffer from long-term injuries. Because look at the NFL. There's NFL players, ex-NFL players that suffered from head injuries they ended up getting dementia. Look at football. The football players who headed the ball, back in the day, the ball was made of pure leather. It was tough. They used to head the ball. And now a lot of them are suffering from dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, etc. So I'm not comparing the two in terms of direct comparability, but if you don't change things, people will get injured. These issues didn't happen in the last generation of cars. Actually, for a long time, as far as I can remember. You didn't see cars bouncing because of their suspension, like porpoising. But the Mercedes issue was bouncing itself, not porpoising, because their suspension, their car is too stiff, and it needs to be run low. And they ran it too low for Lewis and George, and they ended up suffering, especially Lewis. So this measure will help the teams save them from themselves, because Mercedes would have run the car low again. They would have, because they need the performance. There's a trade-off here. So it's a good decision. I'm a Mercedes fan. I'm a Lewis fan. I've said it before. But this is obviously not going to help Mercedes. And I'm fine with that, because obviously I want Mercedes to do well, but at least the drivers will be safe. Not just the Mercedes drivers, but every driver. And this will help Red Bull the most, because they don't really suffer from porpoising. And Ferrari do sometimes, in some conditions. So Ferrari, to escape getting punished, will have to raise their ride height a little bit to a window where they won't suffer from porpoising. Mercedes will have to raise their ride height a lot, because they need to prevent the porpoising from happening. So let me know what you think about this, because I say it's good news. Drivers will be safe now. Their backs will hopefully be safe. Their backs won't be given up on them anytime soon. And I wonder if this will shake up the competitive order a bit, and whether it's going to be introduced at Canada. Does anyone know? Because I don't really know if it's going to be introduced this weekend. It seems a bit short notice, because it looks like they're still trying to go over some mathematical formula to measure the thing, but they do already have sensors to measure the porpoising, because they've shown analysis of it before. Hello guys, I've just found out after I finished recording the first part of this video that according to Planet F1, and I think it's Automotor and Sport, any team unable to run their car in what the FIA considers a safe setup will have to raise the car's ride height by 10 millimeters. And so this is more specific around what the FIA technical directive is for porpoising. So at least we've got some information now. And it's kind of a chunky article. And let me start off with this one. Friday practices at each Grand Prix weekend will be used to determine the baseline after which the FIA will set out each car's path forward, with the teams unable to curb their porpoising forced to raise the ride height by 10 millimeters. So this shows there's a little bit of freedom, unless I'm interpreting it wrong, that if a team is able to run their car low and not have much porpoising, or the porpoising doesn't exceed the limit the FIA will set, then I think you can keep that setup. But if the porpoising exceeds the limit with your, let's say, your preferred setup, then you have to raise your ride height by 10 millimeters. And so, yeah, this is definitely bad news for Mercedes, bad news for teams who have a car that porpoises a lot when they run low. And this basically doesn't affect Red Bull, because they don't have much porpoising, and it sure as heck doesn't porpoise to the effect of to the extent as Mercedes. So they're fine. They can still run their preferred setup and run as close to the ground as possible. Whereas Mercedes, they have to be careful. But there is a difference between porpoising and bouncing. There is a difference, because bouncing is when you're hitting the bumps and the car's moving around a lot. Porpoising is the aerodynamic and also partly suspension driven, whereas the bouncing is actually more towards suspension and the car itself. So it'll be interesting to see again what will happen, the competitive order, how this really will work in practice, because there isn't really a formula yet still. And I think that this article says that the teams will find out the formula and the intricacies around this before FP3. So it will be implemented this Grand Prix weekend. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this affects things, whether it does anything significant or if it doesn't. But first and foremost, it's good, because finally these drivers will not have to suffer from back pain. The article also further goes on to talk about how which measurement may be used, which metric may be used to determine the extent of porpoising. It says here, it is, however, still being discussed how that will be evaluated. Will it be the peak force or the average with the teams? Also in the dark as to what the FIA considers to be an acceptable number. I think they should use an average, because peak force could be anomalous. It could be just happened to have a peak force with one setup or one way of driving or taking a different part of the track, whereas an average number, you have more laps and more bigger data set. And also drivers, they're going to have 70 laps in the race, so you need an average. They're not going to just drive for one lap and have a peak force. Like, if the average exceeds a certain amount, then they have to increase the right height. That's what I think. And obviously, the drivers, the teams, they cannot try and get around this by driving slowly. They're like, F1 teams would actually do that as well. So basically, to sum it all up, extra checks and observations. That's it. That's the word. Extra checks and observations of the plank and skids around the design and wear, and also the metric for measuring porpoising will be through sensors and formula, as well as measuring the peak force or the average force. And I think they should use the average force. Let me know what you think. But yeah, that's pretty much it. This just happened after I finished recording the initial part. And yeah, once again, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Adios. Goodbye.